Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Jobin, and you are listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. This podcast is dedicated to helping family caregivers in Ontario. Through expert tips and resources, you will gain knowledge and validation for the ups and downs that come with caregiving. More importantly, you'll learn that you're not alone. It's so important to take this time for yourself. We're glad you're here. Today, we are joined by Rani Sinanan. Rani started her caregiving journey in 2016 when her mother was diagnosed with gallbladder cancer. She was working as a full-time teacher while providing care for her mother. However, when her mother was re-diagnosed, Rani became her full-time caregiver. 3 months later, her father was diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, and she took on the role of caring for both of her parents. Rani has lived experience caring for her parents who had cancer and has used her experience to provide expertise and guidance to those in the caregiving community. Rani, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm so glad to be here with you all and to share my, my experience with everyone.
We're excited to talk to you, and we wanted to create this space on Time to Talk where Ontario caregivers can connect and share, and hopefully through our conversation today, we can gain a little bit more insight into the caregiving journey for caring for parents. Every situation is, of course, completely different, and you have two different situations to talk about and sort of combined, and hopefully our conversation will resonate with listeners that might be in similar situations. So let's start at the beginning of your caregiving journey. Rani, you started caregiving for your mother in 2016 when she was diagnosed with gallbladder cancer. Can you describe for us how you balanced at the time working full-time while providing care for your mother?
You know, Michelle, that's a great question. It was really challenging at the beginning, especially trying to find that type of balance or a schedule even that worked for us both. But the great thing is I had, a great team that I was working with that allowed me to, create that type of schedule where I could go and be with my mom for her chemotherapy visits, for her consultations with her doctors, and then allowed me to also take care of her when I was at home. It was again challenging, but I think it was very rewarding because it taught me a lot about caregiving while working and the type of experiences that caregivers give. It was my first time caregiving altogether. And I look back on that time and I don't think I actually called myself a caregiver during that period. I think it's common for people that are working full time or even working part time to not consider themselves as caregivers when they're caring for someone else because they're so focused on, trying to do both at the same time that they just think of, I'm just, their child. If it's a parent, I'm just their child and I'm just doing my job. My job is to care for them. And at the same time, still work and, make my money on the other hand. So it really opened my eyes to the journey of, working and caring for somebody at the same time. She had, a lot of appointments. So sometimes it meant stepping away from work a little bit more frequently than I had, anticipated or liked to. But again, when you have a really supportive team behind you, I think they make all the difference. And that's one of the things that we as caregivers really need to drive home to employers nowadays is trying to help us find that balance. We're doing everything that we can for the company, but in turn, we need that little extra support to ensure that we can be the caregivers that we have to be or that we need to be for the people that we're providing care for. So it could be something as simple as allowing us 5 minutes, maybe in a quiet room, if there's a quiet room, in the building, if we're back in the buildings again, or if we're working from home, it could be the same thing, 5 minutes away from the desk, 5 minutes away from, our caregiving responsibilities, just to breathe and to have those, few minutes for each other. So finding that balance was a really crucial part of that, the beginning part of my journey. Sometimes I would work in the morning, go with my mom to her appointments, and then come back and do extra work in the evening. As a teacher, it's a little more challenging because you have to, do all these plans and, worksheets and correcting papers and, marking tests and all those sorts of things. So with teaching is a little bit more challenging. But when you have a job that, may allow you to work from home, sometimes caring for somebody can be a great thing at that time, but also can be really difficult too, because then you never escape. It's like you never
That's a
leave.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought all of this up because, first about talking about how you didn't exactly consider yourself a caregiver right away. It's not generally something that a lot of us see coming, right? It just happens one day and then you're in this situation. So a lot of us don't really plan for it, which is something that employers need to understand. It's great that you had the support where you were and the understanding. It's unfortunately not always the case. So it's really important that you bring up that this is something, the term work-life balance this is the ultimate form of work-life balance, because it's when we become caregivers, it's stepping into a role that we need to do as a family member. It's something that we don't plan for, but we need to do. So it's really great that you bring that up, that employers really need to find ways to be supportive and as understanding as possible when this event happens in one of their employees' lives. But ultimately you did leave your full-time job.
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about that situation?
Yeah. It was literally 2 days before I was supposed to go back to work. And so my mom was actually declared in remission at the end of 2016. And it's because they caught the cancer really early by removing her gallbladder, and they also shaved her liver. They were able to contain the cancer, so to speak. And then the chemotherapy that she did was considered preventative. So by the end of 2016, she was considered in remission. But when the cancer came back in 2019, we kind of knew that it was going to be a lot more difficult this time around. And so, we all were like, okay, well, we didn't even have a conversation as a family. Like, I literally overheard the conversation that the doctors were having. And I called my husband up and I said, hey, I'm just going to call my boss and tell her that I can't come back. And he's like, okay, you do it. You got to do what you got to do. And I said, okay, because like, I can't imagine going through this journey and not being there 24/7 for my mom. And Michelle, like there wasn't even a question in my mind. I didn't even second guess it. I literally just said, I called her up and I said, hey, I'm not going to be able to come back. I'm really sorry. And I really would love to be there with you all, but I can't because my mom really needs me. So it was sort of like a really easy decision for me to make.
What did the shift in your life feel like, going from someone that worked full-time to a full-time caregiving role? What did that feel like to you? I know that it was like an immediate, no questions, this is what I'm going to do, but what did it feel like for you?
I didn't realize everything that was going to come with that decision. And when I say that, I mean, there were times when I got really depressed thinking, oh my God, this is the first time, and I can't even count how many years that I have no financial income coming in. I am not working. I'm not able to provide financially for my family. My husband and I were just 2 years into our marriage. So we're still fairly new in our marriage and still learning about each other, learning about, working financial things together, coming up with strategies. And it was really hard sometimes mentally for me to get over that hump that, I've gone from working full time to now not working at all and depending on EI. And EI ran out within the first year, like not even within the first year, within the first couple of months. I was done. It was clean. And so on top of that, COVID happened.
Yeah.
And so there was that thought of, oh my God, well, how am I going to do this? Like, what's going to happen here? And now I don't have a job. Everything is basically on my EI. COVID's happened and everything's locked down. The possibility of even entertaining the idea of a part-time online job, at first I thought I could maybe venture into something like that, but then I was like, well, I don't even think I could do that, because then my dad ended up getting diagnosed.
Right. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it was really challenging. Going from that shift in my mentality. I was like, okay, I can do this. I can take care of my mom. We can come up with some sort of plan to, make sure she's okay, make sure she's comfortable, go to all of her appointments, take care of her medications. her chemotherapy. And then with my dad's diagnosis, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this all over again? Except now it's with both of them and trying to balance the life with both of them. And again, financially, there was always in the back of my brain that thought of how are we going to financially do this? Now, thankfully, we live in Canada, but again, not everything is covered by, healthcare, by insurance companies. We have to pay out of pocket for certain things. And because my dad was retired at the time, and because my dad kind of fell on that cusp financially, where he wasn't actually eligible for anything really, like disability or any sort of insurances that would help out with paying for medication, that we had to pay out of pocket for. And I'm not kidding when I say this, Michelle, some of their needles that they had to take were like one individual needle cost $4,500.
That's staggering. That's staggering.
Yeah, it is.
It's great that you bring this up because I think, not to be alarmist, but I think we do have a sense that everything's going to be covered. Everything's going to be okay in Canada. And we do have to prepare ourselves for these types of situations. And so that's a lot. So your mom's in remission, you're about to go back to work. She gets re-diagnosed. 3 months later, your dad is diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. Pandemic.
Yep.
It's a lot. It is a lot. And I know not everybody that is, necessarily leaving a full-time job to caregive for a parent is in exactly that same situation. But what would you say to someone that is on the cusp of making this decision about whether or not they should do that or not, or if, not that you can make that decision for them, but what would you say based on your experiences to them?
You know what? I don't have any regrets. I have no regrets about making the decision to leave my job. I think if at that point in my life I had a little bit of a more supportive team, or if I wasn't maybe teaching to the extent that I was, perhaps I could have maybe considered working part-time and caregiving at the same time. But I think inevitably I would have quit my job either way. Because things became too difficult. And I think to anybody who is in that situation, unless you don't fill your cup first, you can't fill the cup of another. And that meant for me quitting my job. I could not have imagined working full-time and taking care of both of my parents at the same time. I literally would have pulled out my hair because it became so challenging trying to mediate everything and be there for them at the same time. So my advice to anybody would be to really take a look at your situation, determine if what you can do first, are you able to work part-time? Are you able to try working part-time, and caregiving at the same time, before you make that decision to quit? And I think now there may be a little bit more, benefits available to caregivers than there were a few years back when I started. So see what you can get and use resources like the Ontario Caregiver Organization. There are a wealth of resources, find out information from them in terms of what you can do, what is available to you first. These are all the things that I would say to somebody in this situation. Don't just throw the towel in, or not make that impulsive decision that I made. Like I said, I have no regrets and I would do it again. But I think gathering all of that information first is so important.
Get the whole picture. Absolutely. I'm going to assume that caring for two parents is not the sum of its parts. But how did you find that experience? Just to touch on that a little bit more. What was the experience like once your dad was diagnosed of caring for both of them at the same time versus caring for one?
It was very different. They both had two completely different takes on how they wanted to handle their diagnosis and their journeys and everything. So I felt like I had to have a split brain at all times. Remembering how my mom wanted to handle things, remembering how my dad wanted to handle things, and then finding my own place in between. and figuring out where I stood, as their caregiver. And then also trying to help them adjust to their different outlooks on things, because they both had very different outlooks. My dad, because his cancer was considered curable, because his cancer was considered, and I don't ever want to use this word, a lot of doctors tend to say, oh, you've got an easy cancer.
Yeah.
Or you're lucky, you've got a good one. Cancer is not easy, and it's not good, period, no matter what type of cancer you have. But I think when my dad's oncologist sort of used those words with him, he kind of was like, he got really confident, he was really happy about it, for himself in that way. And so his outlook was sort of taken over by those phrases and words that were used. And I used to have to kind of tell him, Dad, yes, it may be a little bit easier for you to, get into remission, but it's still very possible that it can happen again. On the other hand, my mom's cancer was terminal.
Right.
We knew when she was first diagnosed in 2016 that there was a very high reoccurrence rate, and usually the window that they give is 5 years. My mom didn't even make it to 5 years.
Right.
By the time she was re-diagnosed again. So things were very different, and it was hard for me trying to constantly switch between the two outlooks, the two mentalities that they shared. That was really challenging, I think, for me.
Caregiving is a rewarding journey, but it can also be incredibly challenging. 90-Second Caregiver provides short, practical tips to help caregivers manage their stress. Whether it's a quick break, relaxation exercise, or a few minutes of self-care, the tips are designed to help you manage stress and maintain your mental health. 90-Second Caregiver delivers health information, tips, and advice related to the caregiving experience and caregiver mental health straight to your inbox each week. Take care of yourself. Subscribe to the 90-Second Caregiver at ontariocaregiver.ca. So, Rani, you've shared your caregiving experiences a little bit so far about, dealing with both of your parents. And now, of course, your father is currently in remission. And sadly, your mother has passed away in November of 2021. I'm so sorry that you lost your mom. How have you coped with this life-altering experience?
So at the beginning of my mom's passing, I think I dove headfirst into one of the things I always said I wanted to do was plan a fundraiser. So I dove headfirst into planning this fundraiser, and I kind of put my whole heart and soul into it. It gave me a purpose. It gave me a reason to look forward to. We did a fundraiser for the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation, and it was on November 26th, which is the day that she passed a year later. And it was great. We raised $9,400, which was amazing. Right. Yeah. And so I kind of I had to find something to look forward to. I was pregnant at the time as well. So it was really hard for me to think about my mom not being there when I had my first child, and to think that she wouldn't actually get to see him. But it's like when I had my son and I brought him home from the hospital, he immediately stared at my mom's picture. We have a big picture on the wall. And I felt that connection right away. And I was like, my mom. There's no question about that. Your grandmother. And I think that kind of helped me a little bit. But in terms of, in general, how did I cope with this entire situation? I was so happy for my dad. I told him ever since, everything happened with my mom, like, all I want is for you to be happy. And if being happy means, for example, you traveling, then you do it. So my dad is actually in Trinidad, which is his home country right now. And he's gonna be there for the next couple of months, and I'm just so happy for him. On the other hand, dealing with the grief that I experienced, I am now starting to find myself again. I think I got lost in the identity of being a caregiver, that I lost who I was. And I kind of thought of me and caregiving as one and the same. But I am an individual. I am my own person. I've got my own personality. I have my own hopes and dreams and aspirations. And so I have started doing something that I absolutely love doing, which is volunteering more. And the OCO has given me lots of, opportunities. And that has helped me cope with, my mom's passing, and even my dad not being physically here with me.
Right.
That's,
and then,
yeah.
And you're a mother now. You have
Yeah.
a baby, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And congratulations to that. The reason I said I was going to talk about this little later on is my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer, I think when my son was 6 or 8 weeks old, and we lost him when he was 6 months old.
Oh, wow.
So not exactly the same, but I have sort of a feeling of what it's like to become a parent for the first time, while also going through this. It's a very complex set of feelings. You've got this incredibly happy thing and this incredibly sad thing that you're dealing with at the same time, and then like the wish afterwards they knew that person better. But it also, in some ways, it was the joy of having my son helped carry me through that really difficult period as well. So I think I can relate a little bit to some of that. What do you, go ahead.
I was just going to say one more thing, regarding that too. We are Hindu. Our religion is Hinduism. And when somebody passes, there's lots of rituals that need to be completed. And as her child, as her daughter, her younger daughter, I was, given the privilege to be able to perform those rites for my mom. And my husband always tells me, he's like, can you imagine if you were further along in the pregnancy, you probably would not have been able to sit there and do those rites.
Right.
But you were, in your journey right where you needed to be so that you could perform those rites for your mom. And guess what? Our son was able to do those rites with you. So that gave me a lot of courage and strength, and just having our son, throughout our entire journey had really helped me process everything that was happening too.
Absolutely. And it sounds like your husband's been a very supportive partner in this journey too. So that's wonderful.
100%. Yeah.
That's great. That is great to have. What do you think are your biggest challenges, or that in general would be the biggest challenges that a caregiver to a parent faces?
I'm really glad you asked that too. I had to tell my parents early on in the caregiving journey, or in their cancer journeys, that you need to stop looking at me as your daughter and start looking at me as your caregiver. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges. As a child, you don't want to see your parents going through difficulties. You want to do everything you possibly can do to take those, difficulties, throw them out the window, make them feel whole and happy and complete again. You want to do all the research you can possibly do, and you want to get them into all of the clinical trials that you can possibly get them into. But that may not be what they want. And that is probably one of the most difficult challenges a caregiver, as a child, will face when caregiving for their parents. It's learning, how do they want to deal with their journey, and learning that boundary, and stepping away from being their child and turning into that role as their caregiver. So I used to tell them, stop looking at me as your daughter, look at me as your caregiver. And if that means you have to wake me up at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, 4 a.m, then so be it. I say this, very proudly, in the sense, not egoistically or anything of that sort, but I did what I did. And that was, I slept with my bedroom door open for almost 2.5 years down the hall from my parents. It's because my parents had a really hard time seeing me as anything other than their daughter. So sometimes they didn't want to wake me up at the night, even if they really needed the support, the help. And so I kind of was like, well, I'm going to sleep with my bedroom door open. So if I hear you, if, you call out to me, if you come to the room door, you can feel comfortable enough to come and wake me up,
Mm.
you know, and especially when my mom started having mobility issues, you know, she relied on me a lot more. So I used to go every couple of hours in the night and take her to the bathroom, check on her. You know, if I had to give my dad his medication, whatever the case was, I was there for them. So I think, Michelle, I think that single-handedly, that is one of the biggest challenges children who are caregivers face when they're taking care of their parents.
Absolutely. Did you have any techniques or resources that you turned to while caring for your parents?
I'll be completely honest with you, not really. There weren't many resources available for caregivers. I can even think back, I'm sure, many, many years ago. And then, you know, when I started fully caregiving in 2019, there really weren't many then either. When I
Wow.
stumbled across the OCO, it was really great. The organization was still fairly new though. So I was still learning the ropes with finding resources through the OCO. But one of the things that I said to my husband and to my parents, I said, whenever I have the ability to do something to create a resource for other caregivers, I really want to do that because I think it's really important that we have more resources. So, something that I did on, you know, with my parents was I bought agendas and I literally used the agenda. That was my, you know, technique that I would chart their vitals every day, you know, their appointments. I know we've got our phones, we can use Google Calendar and, you know, all those great things that we can use, but I think having the agenda was a really great helpful tool. And so my husband actually taught me how we can create an agenda or a planner. And so we actually created a planner that is for caregivers. It's an annual calendar or annual planner agenda. It even has a place to write your medication. It's got sections for writing your doctor's information, specialist information. It's even got a journal for caregivers, a section where there's just dedicated to journaling if you need to. And we sell that on Amazon now. So
Amazing.
yeah, for me, it went from having no resources to trying to create one of my own and to now having one available that caregivers can use.
So what specifically is it called so our listeners can find it?
It's called a caregiver's journal. So it's I can actually share it with you. Oh, well, we're on an audio podcast, so no, I can't actually share the link with you all.
That's okay. We'll try to see if there's a way to do it. So it's called a
Yeah.
caregiver's journal.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's called a caregiver's best friend. That's the proper name for it. If you search it on Amazon, you'll find it. And it's like a pinkish kind of cover with some flowers on it.
Okay.
We still have to release the one for next year. Because again, it's an annual calendar, an annual agenda that you'll find in it. But it's available for purchase on Amazon. And I think it's a great resource. You know, it has everything that a caregiver will need, the space that you will need to chart the vitals and, you know, to take down appointment information, to take down specialist information. And I really found that the medication section really helped, especially when we had to take it into the hospital. Because sometimes for certain appointments, you need to take an updated medication list. So it allowed us to have that information readily available to share with, you know, hospital staff or even when we went to the pharmacy. So it was a really great resource to have.
Fantastic. And I'm glad that you've shared that with other people now.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we touched on a little bit, or you spoke a little bit about your parents both having different approaches to how they saw their illnesses, how they approached their journeys, their overall sort of different state of mind in how they did things. And then sometimes that was maybe something that worked for you and sometimes maybe not. So can you talk about knowing when to take a step back and respect your parents' wishes for how they want to go through their cancer journey? And maybe when you perhaps were a little bit more vocal on what you felt things should be like.
Yeah.
Where's that line?
That's such a loaded question. It's so important to ask though, to talk about, I think. So I'll start with my dad because it's a little bit easier with my dad. my dad, like I said, he was ready to go for his chemotherapy. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He believed 100% in his oncologist, and she was phenomenal. Um, he was not in denial in any sense of the word when it came to his type of cancer. But he just really wanted to, take it all in, do what needed to be done. He didn't really want to talk about it very much. Even though I would try to bring up the conversation, sometimes I'd ask him how he's feeling, but he would just respond to the question in more of a medical sense of the way, like, oh, I'm feeling okay, oh, I'm a little bit tired. But I meant, how are you feeling emotionally? How are you feeling mentally? Um, how are you feeling physically? He really, my dad was a really strong guy before the cancer. All, his entire life, he's been working so hard. And so I think mentally it was hard for him to see himself in that light, to see himself lose all of his hair, to see himself lose the weight, because of the treatments. So he didn't really want to take in all of that and have a conversation surrounding how he really felt. And I also think it was hard for him to have those types of conversations with me, because there's a huge age gap.
Right.
My dad is 76 and I'm only 32. So he always saw me as his little girl. Having that kind of conversation with me will definitely be hard for him, to have. But everything I did in terms of that, I would try to, respect his wishes. Even having conversations about creating a power of attorney was a little tough to have with my dad, because he did not want to entertain the thought or the idea of, what if, what if the, passing away, or you get to a point where you cannot communicate your own wishes, that's a conversation that you do need to have. It's a difficult conversation to have, but you do need to have it as a caregiver, especially when you're caring for your parents. What do you want for yourself if there comes a time when you can't vocally express it yourself? So my dad really wasn't 100% on board with having these conversations. And so I had to try and work my way around that and figure out a way to respect that. On the other hand, my mom accepted very early on in her diagnosis that she probably wasn't going to come out of it. She was on board with having these conversations with me. She shared what she wanted, what she didn't want. Very early on, she was okay with signing power of attorney. She was not depressed either about that. She kind of became at peace. For my mom, it was trying to navigate caring through that journey. So like I said to you earlier, it was two different outlooks on their cancer journeys. Trying to find that middle ground of, how to handle both of their journeys and their outlooks was really challenging. And also not overstepping, because at the beginning I really was trying to find different ways to help my mom, you know, homeopathically, um, clinical trials, looking at a bunch of clinical trials and options. My mom didn't want any of those things. Um, she was comfortable going to chemotherapy, taking her radiation as needed, based on what the doctors were saying to her. She really didn't want to entertain the thought of going down a clinical trial route, because she was scared. She was genuinely scared that her time would be cut a lot shorter. There's no certainty with anything. Even with the regular chemotherapy and radiation, there's no certainty with that either. But she really was like, I really don't want to do those things, so don't bring those options to me, because I'm not going to entertain them. And that was okay. That was her way of doing things. And there also came a time when she could physically no longer handle the chemotherapy and the radiation. And when that time came, she said to me, I really don't think I want to do any more treatment. And that was difficult to hear, because in my mind, I was like, oh my God, if we stop the treatment altogether, then this cancer is just going to grow so fast. And then what's going to happen, right? But I mean, I had to respect that. That was her wishes. She physically could not tolerate it, and I could see it. Everybody could see it. So it becomes the choice, or that fine line comes seeing what you want, knowing what you want, but also seeing what they want and respecting their wishes. At the end of the day, it's their body. They have to physically go through this. So as much as you may want all of these things for them, you are not the one that's going to go through it. They are. So you have to be really on board with respecting their wishes and helping them find that, that journey or that path to acceptance, whatever it may be.
That's great advice based on your experience with this. And I wanted to also talk about, as a caregiver, your interaction with the medical team and the moments where you find yourself needing to advocate, not only for your person that is receiving care, but also for your very important role and perspective as a caregiver within the team, as part of the team, whether or not that is sort of recognized by the medical team or not. So can you talk about your experience and sort of advice that you might have in terms of bridging the gap between the medical team and the caregiver?
Yeah, first off, I'm going to say there is a huge gap. There is a huge gap that needs to be bridged. And COVID made that gap even bigger. It made it really hard to advocate for our loved ones. From August to March, so August 2019 to March of 2020, I was there for every single appointment, every single consultation with the doctor, every single chemotherapy session, every single radiation session. I was there for it all. And then lockdown happened, and I was no longer allowed to enter in the hospital. All I was able to do was take my mom to the hospital door, get her in her wheelchair, wheel her to the desk where you do the pre-screen questions, and that was it. Somebody else came and wheeled her to the elevator and took her up. So with my dad, it was a lot easier in the sense that I didn't have to do too much advocating for him, because he could reiterate everything himself very clearly. My mom, on the other hand, although she didn't have any language barriers, her chemotherapy took a real toll on her mental health in terms of her cognitive ability. Sometimes she was not able to fully express how she was feeling properly, or list her medications. When they just asked you, so what medications did you take, or what are your chemo medications? My mom couldn't always remember those names, much less the dosages of those medications. So it was really hard at the beginning. I kept calling and I kept trying to get in with her, to go in with both of them for their appointments, and they just wouldn't allow me. And a lot of the times the medical staff, taking for granted is a really strong phrase to use when referring to the medical staff in terms of caregivers, but I think we are taken for granted. I think they don't really see the true importance that we have in the role of the patient's life, or the person that we're caring for. They don't see our full value. And so oftentimes, when I would say something like, hey, this is what I've noticed. This is where my thoughts are on this medication, or whatever the case may be, or, this is how she's really feeling. Is there nothing you can do to help her out, or anything like that? They would often say, well, this is just what it is. It is what it is. And it's not, it is what it is. If I'm telling you this is what she's experiencing, then there needs to be something that we can look into. Medications have side effects. And as the caregiver in the home with the patient, you're the first person to see those side effects. You're the first person that can turn and tell, a medical personnel, hey, this is what I've noticed is happening. Is there anything we can do about it? Is this okay to be happening? Or where is it that point in time where it's not okay and we have to say we need to stop taking this medication? And so I used to get railroaded a lot, and I always had to put my foot down. I always had to kick that door in. If appointments were needed to be made and we were getting pushed really far out, but you know, our needs or our concerns were very valid and very important, I would continuously call. I'd continuously call and be like, hey, can you put me on a cancellation list? Is there nothing you could do to help us get in earlier than that? I wasn't afraid to reach out to the different medical staff members, um, to get that help. And I wasn't afraid to advocate for my parents, no matter what. I know we're sort of at the mercy of the medical staff at the end of the day. Like, we need them to get the treatments done. We need their support. We need their guidance. Yes. But at the same time, we also have to be willing to, to share how we feel.
Mm-hmm. It's really important. I will definitely say that, in the instances with members of my family and my experiences with caregiving, the ideal situation is that you get a medical team and a caregiving team and a patient where there's mutual respect and understanding for each other's skill sets, knowledge, what they bring to the table. It's unfortunately not always the case. It's the goal. It is the goal. But that's when you, as a caregiver or the patient, they really need to be not afraid to speak up and advocate for themselves. So I think it's very important that you share that. You've given us a lot of great advice, and we're excited that you have your planner that's available on Amazon as well, that I hope that our listeners will definitely look for. And remind me again the name of it. It is
Caregiver's Best Friend.
The Caregiver's Best Friend, which we definitely need. But do you have any sort of parting thoughts or parting advice or wisdom in terms of when you're caregiving for parents, somebody that might be in the same or similar situation that you've been in?
Enjoy every moment of it, the good and the bad. Because for me, I had so many wonderful memories with my mom, even with my dad during his journey of cancer. Despite all the difficult ones that we did have, or challenging ones, but it's helped me grow as a person. It's helped me realize what I want for myself in the future if I end up in this position. And the truth is, the aging population is growing, and the aging population also needs more support and care. And for our generation, or caregivers my age, having gone through what I went through has given me the knowledge and the skill set to face if I have to go through it again. And I cherish every single moment that I had with my mom during this journey. Even when we came home, she passed at home. That was her wish, to pass at home. Even when we were at home in the days before her passing, I'm going to share something that's really personal. So again, I was pregnant. My mom completely lost the ability to speak, unfortunately. And because her organs were failing, she also had a lot of cognitive difficulties. So not being able to speak, articulate what she really wanted, and then not being able to fully understand what was happening around her. So before we went into the hospital, she remembered that I had doctor's appointments coming up. And in order for her to communicate to me, how are you feeling? How is the baby feeling? She would stick her hand down my shirt and play with my neck here, the top of my neck. And that was her sign of, how are you and how's the baby? Every time she wanted to know how I was doing, she would do that. She would do it in front of anyone. The room would be filled with people, and she would stick her hand down my shirt. And that was her way of saying she loved me, and she loved my son, and she wanted to know how we were feeling and if we were okay. And I will cherish that for as long as I can remember that memory. So to anyone caring for your parents, as difficult as it can get, and it will get very difficult, sometimes even frustrating, you will get frustrated with, with your parents while you're caring for them. Cherish every minute of it, because you've been given that opportunity or that blessing to care for them, just as they cared for you when you were a baby and you could not vocally share how you felt, so that would be my parting words.
That's great advice. I agree with you. It's not something that you will ever regret. Rani, thank you so much. You've shared so much with us today. It's been such a valuable conversation for me, and I think our listeners will also agree with me. So we thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate it. You all take care.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can access more details about support services on our website, ontariocaregiver.ca. Until next time, I'm Michelle Jobin, and you have been listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. We hope you have a wonderful day.